Those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Ellis. I am the Director of College Counseling here at Pally. Some I may have met in previous years with other students, but so happy to see you all. So glad we're back in school and almost back to normal. Still some logistical things to deal with, but it's a lot better than being at home. So tonight, I wanted to first introduce our College Center team. It's myself, Karen Ellis, and then we have Melissa Rangel, who's been with Pally for some time now. And then we also have a new employee, and his name is Marlon Green. Some of the things we're going to talk about you may have heard before, but I thought it was a good idea to go over some of the things like the grad requirements versus the A through G requirements, what Naviance is, what you do if you get a grade of C, what it means to work really hard and have a really good, strong second semester and junior year. What we're thinking about doing about the PSAT this year. Those are some of the questions I know many of you may have. So we'll start off, first of all. And I wanted to tell you, Jen Kaifesh will be coming on later from Great Expectations, and I'll give you a little bio of her later. And hopefully, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. There's a lot of you, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Okay, so let's start off with what are the graduation requirements? On the Pally website, if you go to counseling, I think right there you'll see graduation requirements. Would also show you a side-by-side view of what it means to meet the graduation requirements for Pally, and what it also means to meet the A through G requirements for college. We have a health requirement, we have a computer requirement, and we have a tech requirement. That isn't part of the A through Gs that are required by college. Colleges have 16 core courses that they require, and those you can find also under counseling on our website. Those do include the 2 years of the social sciences. You will have definitely 4 years of English, which means you should have an English class every single year. You will have 3 years of required math, and that's as high as Algebra 2. And this is the minimum requirements, of course. 2 years of lab science, which is usually classes like bio and chem, and then some kids go on and do physics. 2 years of foreign language, and it has to be the same foreign language. A year of visual and performing arts, and then 1 extra year of any of those A through G. So it could be an extra year of language, an extra year of science to meet those 16 core courses. And that would be the A through Gs that are required for all the Cal States and all the UCs here in California. If you meet those, most of those A through Gs, with a few colleges with exceptions, will fulfill the requirements, minimum requirements for entrance into college. Now you have to be careful because some years require that you take a science every single year, or that you take a math every single year. When you get into the more competitive and selective schools, the more they're going to require from you. So just make sure you understand those differences. And then when you get into NCAA Division I, the requirements change a little bit more. But we're going to have a workshop on NCAA requirements a little later in the year, so we can talk about that a little later. Now, when you talk about keeping track of things for the College Center, one of the things we use, one of the tools that we have is called Naviance. You may have heard of it. We introduce all of our juniors to that in the spring. So in the spring, we will activate all of you guys Naviance account, and we'll get you started on using that. We manage all of your college applications through that portal. We try to meet with all the juniors in the spring of their junior year, but we don't call you out or summon you like the academic counselors do. You are required to come to the College Center and make an appointment with one of the college counselors. Once you do that, that's when we'll give you your Naviance code. We had a wonderful parent that took care of that for us last year. If she confirms she'll do it again next year, we'll have you email or email Savannah Horn, and she'll give you your registration code to get you started on Naviance. We try not to do it much sooner than that because you really can't use it very much until, you know, February of your junior year. Is plenty of time to start researching schools. A lot of you may have schools in mind already, but we don't have the capacity to activate all of those accounts right now.
Okay.
And Naviance is a way for us to electronically submit documents on your son or daughter's behalf to colleges. Many high schools use it. Most colleges have access to it. So it's a really streamlined way to get documents out really fast to a bunch of schools. One of the things kids will need for colleges next year are teacher recommendations. All of that is also submitted through Naviance. It's really, really friendly user friendly. So navigating it, the students don't have any problems with it, and it really helps you keep track and to manage all of their college applications. Another thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is the importance of your junior year. Students should be working very hard. It's the last time and the closest time and the closest academic year to going off to college. So it plays a very important role in admissions. They look very closely at those grades. So work hard and help them make their junior year their strongest academic year. I know a lot of us had difficulties during COVID. Try to come back from that as much as you can. That second semester of junior year is the very last time UCs and Cal States will use grades for admissions. Now for the private schools and out-of-state public schools, we will get to send first semester grades. But if they apply ED or EA, they won't be able to do that because those grades don't come out till January when we come back from Christmas break. So you want to just do your very best, end very strong. They can look at courses that you take next summer. So that's another way to kind of boost that GPA one last time, but pay close attention to your junior year this year. Okay. And I know you probably have some questions for me. I wanted to give Jen more time, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She's a lovely lady, of course, and she's the owner of a company called Great Expectations College Prep. So she works with a lot of our Pally families and helping them as a private counselor, helping them navigate this whole difficult college application process. She herself is a graduate of Northwestern University, and she has nearly 20 years of experience in the world of college admissions. During her time at Northwestern, she served as a liaison between the university and local high school applicants. After spending several years in the test prep industry, she founded Great Expectations in 2006 after recognizing the need for holistic, full service guidance. The company's goal is not just to help students navigate standardized testing, which she will talk a bit about, and also the college admissions process, but also to encourage them to find academic and extracurricular pursuits that they both enjoy and excel at. After all, at the end of the day, colleges want strong students, but they also want real people with real commitments to their interests. Great Expectation counselors have helped thousands of students think ahead throughout the high school process to create a narrative that is both authentic and unique. So Jen, take it away.
Thank you so much for that lovely and thorough introduction. Thank you all. Sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. We got there. I think so we're all set. If you know anyone who's not been able to get in, they should be fine now. So here I am going to share a document here and get this up and running. So she gave you, some background on me, and they said I went to Northwestern. I've done the admissions world, been doing college counseling and test prep for about 20 years. So what we want to talk about today is kind of what juniors need to be thinking about and what they need to be doing this year, also in the context of COVID, right? And everything that they were not able to do in years prior, and kind of what they have control of over this point. So let's talk about college application first. Let's talk about the parts of it. And then we're going to go a little bit more in depth about kind of what you have control over, what you should be thinking about at this point. So this is just a general breakdown. This is not precise. Every school is different. Obviously, you can see, standardized test scores are still 25% here. The UCs and Cal States, as many of you probably know, are now test blind, which means if you got a perfect 1600, you're not sending it in. You can't. But a lot of schools, even if they're test optional, still strongly encourage them if you can test well. So we will talk about that in a little bit. But looking at this, wanting to understand high school academics, I'm going to try to break things down. If you're looking at high academic schools, which when I reference that, I usually mean you're looking at top 20 schools, give or take. And then there's plenty of wonderful schools that are, not as intense as competitive. So don't stress too much. I'll try to make it clear when I'm talking about how many APs or what types of scores based on the types of schools you're applying to, but you can only get so specific. So, too much at the beginning. But so high school academics, it's course rigor and it's your grades. So if you're applying to the Stanfords of the world and you don't take any honors or AP classes and you have straight A's, they're not going to be particularly interested, bluntly, because they're looking for kids who challenge themselves and excel and do fabulously. AP classes are meant to be college level classes. So kids who do well in that are proving that they'll be fine in a college setting. But so your high school academics are basically, both of those things, but it's also your interest. So if you say you wanted to be a doctor and you're interested in going pre-med, but either didn't take or did poorly in biology and chemistry, that's going to be a problem, right? So you want to make sure that junior year, you're taking the right classes. Obviously schools started at this point, but making sure that you're doing really well and really focusing on the schools or the classes that are most relevant to the schools you're applying to for certain programs. Now, standardized test scores, we'll get more in depth into that. The reason it's got equal weight on this lovely little pie chart, which is probably not totally valid, but the idea here is that, look, high school academics, you need that to get a good look, right? If you're applying to a top school or any remotely competitive school, that's the first thing they're going to look at. You need that to be qualified as an applicant. But the standardized test scores, the data showed through COVID, especially this past year, at test optional schools, the people who did best submitted strong test scores, which makes sense. Right? In COVID, kids had to sacrifice activities. A lot of, online schooling was really challenging. So colleges don't have much to work with, right? They don't know much about their students. So that's the beauty of standardized test scores, is it gives them context so they can compare apples to oranges from different high schools. And so even if they're test optional, it's something to keep in mind. And again, we'll go into this a little bit more in depth. Extracurricular activities, the 25% here. Again, everything's relative based on what your activities are, what you're doing, how involved you are. If you cure cancer over the summer, it counts more than 25%. But if you are, on a sports team and maybe joined French club, great, that'll be lovely. But they want more than that in an ideal world, which we'll talk about. Essays and letters of recommendation, we'll talk about that as well. And miscellaneous, that's going to be anything from, are you an athlete? Are you an artist with a portfolio? Are you a legacy? Do you have connections? This is all the things. Miscellaneous is a big bucket, basically. So, okay. So talking about the high school academics, this is, I think, a big thing to be aware of. It's when people ask, if you're comparing, there's a kid at Pali compared to a kid at a private school on the West Side compared to another, public school in the Valley, how do colleges make a choice? The reality is colleges, yes, they know kind of the rigor of certain schools, but the main thing is that they're comparing you to your classmates. So junior year, everyone talks about the pressure that kids are under to do well, right? And have good grades and, again, challenge themselves. But a lot of this is compared to other people in your grade at Pali. So what you want to think about, again, if you're on the extremely competitive side, are you doing as much as everyone else who might be applying to the same type of school? So if you realize, at some high schools, they don't even have APs. Pali has a ton. So the reality is, if you choose not to take them when they're there and they're present and other people are taking advantage of them, that will be, in theory, held against you, right? Again, depending on where you're applying. But a school that wants a lot of APs, if they see other applicants from Pali who've taken them or honors, they're going to wonder why you didn't take them. So just know that this comparison to your classmates is always a bit of a challenge, because this is one thing with Pally that I always say is an amazing aspect, but also can be a challenge here is you have so many options. Keep in mind also, if you decide, let's say you want to be a psychologist and you have AP Psych, you need to take AP Psych. If you say you want to study something with the environment and you don't take AP Environmental Science and it's offered, that's a problem, right? So just keep in mind the fact that you want to be really trying to master what you're claiming that you're good at. All of this fits together, and we'll talk again more about this in a second, but to just kind of as a cursory thought, think of it this way, from a college's perspective, if you are saying, I want to be a doctor, but you have not taken advanced sciences, you've not taken anything like kind of touched on, that's a red flag with them. Either you don't really love it and you don't really know what it is or what it entails, or you're maybe not that good at it. Same thing, I have people who say they want to major in business, but all they've ever done, all the classes they've ever taken have been theater, English, things like that. And they do poetry competitions. If they've done nothing to express or demonstrate an interest in business or in economics or whatever it is, it can be a challenge senior year. So again, then this can be extracurriculars. It can be, actual academic classes. It can be electives. It can be classes at SMC. It can be classes, there's UCLA classes you can take, lots of options. But within Pally, if it's available and it's related to your studies and your areas of interest, you should try to take them whenever possible. And that's class rank. So by the way, class rank, it's not about being number 42 out of something. I don't even think Pally ranks officially anymore. But the idea is that they still get a sense of the average GPAs for a class. Again, how many kids are taking APs. They also see there's a lot of kids at Pally. So colleges see a lot of applicants and have a general sense of how you relate. So those are just some things to think about, but recognizing, like I always say, look around and see what other top students are doing who are applying to the same types of schools, and just make sure you're competitive with that. Okay, APs. So I oftentimes have families ask why APs matter. What's the point? If you're in them, great. If you're not, we can talk about why they might be of importance come senior year, since these are hopefully all juniors here. But the point of APs is to show, like we talked about, colleges that you are qualified to take a college level course. So if you were saying you want to be an engineer, but you can't do honors or AP physics, they're going to be concerned, right? So this is something, and again, we're talking about the super highly competitive. Let's say you're going to a less competitive college and you're looking for somewhere that's a wonderful school, but they're not expecting everyone to take a ton of honors and APs. That's totally fine. Again, everything's relative, right? To where you're applying, what you're trying to study. They're wonderful programs, but engineering is a perfect example that you can go to a far less competitive school. They still would want to see AP, math, and science if possible. Engineering is extremely competitive on that front. The other reason to take APs, AP participation. Look at these numbers. So 2008, 752,000, 2018, over 1.2 million. So this is a trend, and kids are taking more and more of them, for better or worse. That's a different conversation. But the reality is what's normal now and what a lot of top students are taking, the numbers are going up. So in order to be competitive, you want to take more, when possible. By the way, this is something that, Karen, myself, no one else can really speak to. You and your student, as parents, figuring out where their breaking point is. Because the reality is you want to challenge your student, or the student wants to challenge themselves, but not go too far. Because I've seen kids who've taken too many APs, who've taken too many honors, and then their GPA suffers, right? Or they end up miserable and hating the class, or just stressed all the time. That's not what you want either. So every kid is different. And so it's not about, a lot of people will ask, how many APs should I be taking? What should I be doing? It just depends on what the kid really can handle, and keeping grades up and mental health in check, but also, what's available and all these other things. So with AP participation, there's a lot of options. So this is something, Pally offers the vast majority of these. I think there's one or two that are missing, no problem. Again, it's never held against you. So if you wanted to study something that's not on this list that Pally just doesn't offer, it looks wonderful. Go to SMC, go to any community college, go take the class, do a college class. If, something, there is econ, but at the same time, let's say you couldn't get an AP econ class at the school and you went and took economics at SMC, you can explain to colleges like, I loved it so much and we didn't have it available, so I went and took it, right? And you went and sought it out. It shows initiative, it shows passion, enthusiasm, all these things. So said, the pros and cons of Pally offering, the vast majority is that usually it's available to you, which is a good thing, but you don't get that initiative thing all the time. But looking at these and recognizing which ones matter depends on what you're applying for, right? If you're applying as an art major, there's a lot of art programs that you should be looking at. If you're looking at linguistics or you're looking at even international business, a lot of them want to see students with a high proficiency in a language. So think about kind of the package you're putting together and which of these will fit, all right, and kind of fit with your narrative. AP scores. This is something I also hear a lot of questions about, because I have a lot of families who are kind of under the impression that if you have great grade in the class, you get an A in your AP class. I've had parents go, well, I don't think the AP score matters then because they already got an A. What you have to keep in mind, just like other standardized testing, is that AP scores are not subjective. Grades in classes are, right? The reality is a teacher could love you, a teacher could hate you. You could have all of these different things that factor into your grade. You could have one assignment that you got a 0 on that brought your grade down or up, right? They don't really know. This is the way that you prove it to them on a more national standardized scale. So if you get a 5 on an AP, that's like an A in a college class, right? Every college is going to be absolutely head over heels for anybody with 5s. They love 5s. But 4s are honestly not just as good, but really, really good. And those are kind of the more common where it's like, great, this is above passing. You've proven you're very competent and that you have, proficiency in whatever the subject is, but maybe, your teacher didn't get to everything in the curriculum, which is why you didn't get a 5, or maybe you ran out of time on the exam. It's whatever it is, it's fine. So 4s and 5s, every college is impressed with. Basically, you'll be in great shape. 3s. The challenge with 3s is where you're applying. Most colleges love 3s. They're delighted. It's, as you can see, it's basically like a C on the low end. So, C to B minus is kind of what they equate it to. When you have that, you're sending people the message of like, I took this class, it was challenging, but I passed what would be a college class. This is awesome, right? I did great and I'm good. Again, most schools are thrilled with that. The top 20 schools, 3s are iffy, right? Because it's just like applying with a C on your transcript. It's better than a D or an F, and it shows that you still passed the class, but it's not necessarily the most competitive. 1s and 2s, if you get a 1 or 2 on an AP, it's not the end of the world, especially during COVID, because so many people struggled with that, and rightfully so. We pretend you were sick that day. On the college applications, on the section where you put AP scores, we leave this off, right? We don't put 1s or 2s. They may wonder what you got, and wonder why you took the class and not the AP exam, but you could have been sick that day. You could have been out of town, something, family emergency. They don't need to know, they're not going to ask, but just know 1s and 2s you don't want to send. So when you're taking your AP classes as a junior, if you are, I want you to think of it in the capacity of, not just taking the grade seriously, but taking the AP exam seriously as well, and trying to do well in both. And obviously, if you can get an A and a 5, then there's every single school in the world is going to be thrilled with that. So whenever possible, try for that. Okay, so let's talk about standardized test scores. So one thing, just as a recap, is to make sure everyone is aware, this happened like 6 months ago now, but that the subject tests, the SAT subject tests no longer exist. They are gone. So those used to be basically mini final exams. So what you would have is if you took, even regular physics or regular US history, you could take the subject test on, again, in the standardized test, it's like a final exam for US history. If you do well and you get a great score, great, you can send it to colleges. It was like a mini AP, but these no longer exist. So I bring this up for especially those of you who had older kids who took them. For some kids, good testers, it was awesome. It was great. For not great testers, it's delightful that they're gone. So just know those don't factor in anymore. SAT, ACT, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference here in a moment, but the AP scores, you can see I did 60-40. The reality is with COVID, this is all up in the air and it depends on the school. But again, keeping that data in mind, that the standardized testing, if you are, let's say you're applying to a school that has an average GPA of a 4.0 and an average ACT score of a 30, right? If you're applying to that and you have a 4.6 and the best you can do on the ACT is a 27, you probably go test optional. That would be a time when testing would bring you down, right? But let's say you're around a 4.0, maybe even a little low, or even higher, but a great tester can put the effort in and put the time and energy in and get a 32, 33. Now you've balanced it. You're higher than average in one, maybe both, which would be the best ideal situation. But that's the way to look at this, is what when test optional is really optional. The reality is, colleges always say it doesn't hurt you to not submit scores. That's true conceptually, but it helps you to submit good scores. So it's a little misleading when I feel like a lot of students feel like, great, I don't have to test because it's optional. It's the same as if a college says, interviews are optional, or this essay is optional. The reality is, yes, you don't have to do it. You might have a very valid excuse why you're not going to, but if you can, it's better, right? So that's just something that, making sure the optional thing is clear. It's if it benefits you. Think of it as almost, I equate it to a portfolio for art students. So if you're a good enough artist that submitting a portfolio helps you, submit a portfolio. If you're not that strong of an artist, don't submit a portfolio. Standardized testing is the same way. So AP exams, we've kind of already talked about. That rounds out your transcript. That's more for that to make sure that, again, your grades really reflect what they are. Pally, I think, is there's not grade inflation at Pally. You can sink or swim there. There are plenty of private schools, which shall not be named, but that everyone has incredible GPAs, right? And there's one that I had a girl with a 3.6 and she was bottom 25th percentile at that private school. That's ridiculous, right? It's like, and colleges see that. So they're like, let's see her test scores and see how she compares to the rest of the country. All right, so that's where it factors in even more, but you're helping colleges make these decisions. Okay, so SAT and ACT, looking at the differences and kind of recommendations for those of you who are thinking about this. So SAT and ACT play to different strengths. This is the main thing to keep in mind. We see a lot of families who the parents took the SAT or think the SAT is more respected or more common. The reality is ACT is actually more common, and especially at the top 20 schools. It doesn't mean you need to pick the ACT. You pick what plays to your strengths, but don't feel like for any reason the SAT is more competitive or more respected or anything. That's very outdated. About 12 years ago, the last school dropped and said, we take both equally. We have no preference, because they know everything plays to different strengths. They highlight different strengths and weaknesses. So SAT gives you more time per question. So you can go a little bit more slowly and methodically and meticulously as you work through, but it's also a lot more analytical. So the reading in particular, if you think of the reading sections, we'll compare these because this is the biggest difference. So SAT is testing what's the best answer. ACT is going to test what's the right answer. So ACT might have a question of like, where did red squirrels make their home in the winter? And the answer is treetops, right? But so anyways, so if it's in the treetops, line 27 said that they live in treetops. Super easy, but it moves fast for ACT. SAT is going to be, one could infer that in a different scenario, this character might do which of the following, right? It's going to be a little bit more in depth. It's going to be a little bit more, honestly, tricky, but a kid who's wonderful at AP English and has read a ton may do wonderfully, right? So SAT does play to different strengths on reading. Math is also the difference. So math on SAT, it's testing the application of concepts to real world situations. So they don't care if you know Pythagorean theorem, they care if you have a triangular table and you need to have a weird tablecloth. How do you cut the tablecloth, right? So they're always going to try to do more word problems. It can be a little bit trickier. The concepts, the base concepts being tested are pretty much at the same level. The only exception is at the very highest level, the ACT goes through algebra 2. You might have one or two questions that end up coming out of like math analysis or pre-calc equivalence, but it's usually more based on where a textbook ends and the next one begins. It's not formally higher level. It's just some schools don't quite get to that concept in algebra 2. We're talking literally a couple questions max. SAT loves a lot more statistics, which honestly drives us a little crazy as tutors, because most people don't take statistics possibly ever. And if they do it senior year, which is too late, but the concepts are pretty straightforward. So kids sometimes freak out when they see these going, I've never learned this. I don't know what this is, but it's fine because, if you get a book, obviously there's a million companies out there. You have somebody, a tutor to help you break through and understand some of these concepts that you didn't learn in class, you'll be great. But it is definitely more straightforward on ACT. So kids who can just see, this is a Pythagorean theorem question, answer the question, move on, you're going to do better, but it does, again, move faster. So you have less time per question. So you have to kind of know what you're doing and be able to let go. Science section. Science section does not test your science knowledge. This is the most important thing I can tell you, because so many kids don't take ACT because they're afraid of the science section. Science tests your ability to read graphs and charts. That's it. So what you're really doing here is you're trying to assess, can you read a table, a chart, a graph, interpret, did bird A or bird B fly faster or farther in the spring? That's it. So if you see crazy biology terms or chemistry terminologies or equations, they're not testing that. So don't let that deter you. It does take practice. There's definitely strategy to that section, and pacing can be a challenge, but it's not nearly as bad. So when you take the SAT and ACT, since all of you guys are junior families, at least presumably, if you are all junior families, if you are done with Algebra 2, you can start yesterday. Because again, the odds of you learning that one or two concepts that might be in the next textbook, it's not worth waiting. You have plenty to review, get started, get testing out of the way. To me, second semester of junior year, the only reason you would wait is if you were in Algebra 2, because there's enough material there. Now you can start prep sooner, but you wouldn't want to start testing until at least second semester because you need a little bit more of that foundation. But also, by the way, it does depend on what score you want and where you're applying. So if you're looking for a school that is, again, once above a 30 or above a 1400, give or take, if you're kind of in that range, you need to know the majority of the math, right? They want you're looking at the top 7-8% of the nation. You need to have a lot. But if you're looking to break 25, national average, by the way, is a 21 on ACT and 1,000 on SAT. That's college readiness factor. That's the kind of middle percentile, the 50th percentile there. If you're just looking to get a little bit above that, that's great. Then you don't need to wait to finish Algebra 2 because so much of the math is from stuff you've already learned. You don't need to hold yourself up because that's going to be the difference of a couple questions here and there. So those are the main differences. So what we always recommend, what we do with our students, we offer something called a dual diagnostic. And so what it is taking an SAT one weekend, then spending 2 hours of review with the tutor going question by question, what did you miss? Then taking an ACT the next weekend, doing the same thing, 2 hours of review. What did you miss? But also why, right? Was it because you read the questions wrong? Because you were rushing? Because you said 2 + 3 = 6? What's causing the problem? Because knowing which test is better for you, what I really would adamantly deter you from doing is taking just random practice tests, comparing the scores and going, well, the equivalency, I did slightly better on this test than the other one. Because again, ACT, people usually bomb the science section the first time, but 5 minutes of understanding what it is, they do great. So you want to make sure you're actually looking in depth and understanding what is going on the tests themselves. So timeline, we kind of touched on this, but junior year, again, by the way, you're not taking 4 sittings. This is a little misleading of a graph. The idea is like, these are kind of 4, you could take all 4. I wouldn't recommend it. We usually recommend 2 to 3 sittings, 2 for sure. 3rd is iffy. 4th is something probably went wrong if you're doing 4. But the idea is that with 2 sittings, you're taking the curve out of play. So ACT in particular does have a more extreme curve. So you could get the same number of questions right on one test and get a higher or lower score than the next test with the same number of questions right. It can actually work to your advantage. Obviously it can work against you, but it's 50-50. So we always say take it twice regardless and hope that you can do that. Also, a lot of schools are allowing super scoring, which means you could take math from the April date and English and reading from the June date, right? And science from whatever other date. So taking it once, unless you get basically a perfect score, you usually want to try again. So know that for both tests, SAT and ACT. But as you can see on this chart, SAT and ACT, if you can start now because you're done with Algebra 2, great. But the one that we usually try to discourage is the senior year one. It's not the end of the world. A lot of kids do it. The problem is if you don't know your scores, it's tougher to sometimes understand where you should be applying. Right? Because we have students all the time who are like, well, I took a practice test. I'm pretty sure I'm going to score 1,500. And then they get their scores back and they're at 1,210 and their college list is wrong. Right? And it's not balanced. So if you can have scores by the end of junior year, it makes everyone's life easier and better because then we're going in with all the data. We can look at your GPA through junior year. We can look at test scores and really assess where you're at. But know that fall of senior year date is there. It's an option if you need it. Now, PSAT. So this is something I always want to touch on briefly. It's not that, obviously that big of a deal, but basically if you're possibly going to be in the top 3%, PSAT is great for the national merit. You've got the scholarship, you've got the awards. It's great to put on college applications. It's great to get the money. There are certain things that having that PSAT score matter, but the big thing is if you're not in the top 3%, it doesn't matter. So I've had people who were like top 5% and we're all excited. It's like, no one will ever see that score. You don't send it to colleges. Colleges don't care. So PSAT, you can treat it as practice, but sometimes I have students who already decided ACT is a better fit for them. Then you don't need to prep for the PSAT, right? You can just take it and see how it goes. That's fine. And it's great for Pally. It's great for you guys to have people sit for this. You want to sit for it. but the pressure of stressing and really prepping for it. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you, let's say you have some, younger kids that are sophomores, if they are great testers and they want to take the PSAT and they get a perfect score on the PSAT, once again, no one will ever know. All of that stuff, all of the national merit stuff we just talked about is only relevant junior year. So that's the fall date that you can take it for. It's usually in mid-October. And Karen will give you more information on that, but it is something PSAT, don't stress about, I guess is the point, unless you have the potential to be kind of at the top in that. So I say if you're top 10% of your class, give or take, then you might want to prep to get to that top 3% in testing, and that's not a huge jump. Okay, that's standardized testing. So I didn't want to go too in depth because with test optional, everyone has different experiences and different needs. And again, where you're applying, who values testing is very different places. So we can talk later. Something I'll put up at the end of the presentation, but I do free 30-minute consultations with any family. It's not a sales pitch. It's not pressured. I'm happy to talk to you guys, answer questions. So if you have questions that are specific to your kid and your scenario, then we can address it there. So we'll do some Q&A at the end, but if there's something that's more individualized, we can discuss that later. So, all right, extracurricular activities. How do you spend your time? This factors in a lot of different things. So wanting you to be able to recognize kind of the importance of each of these. Now, there's obviously, as everything else here, it depends on what you're good at and what you're spending your time on. If you're going to the Olympics for a sport, then clearly notable accomplishments and even potentially leadership are going to matter more. Community impact, like I said, impacts the community. But if you're just a great athlete, that's a different bucket, right? But sometimes you have an activity that actually knocks out several of these little sections. But community impact is the thing that colleges, in theory, are looking for the most. So a kid who shows up to pick on French Club again, you show up to French Club and all you do is once a month, you meet on Fridays, you eat baguettes, you go home. Colleges don't care, right? That doesn't make you more well-rounded. It doesn't make you a better applicant. Now, if you coordinate French cooking lessons or help support French foreign exchange students, and you're doing things, that's different, right? That's community impact. You're making a difference, right? So it doesn't have to be, again, curing cancer, bringing world peace. It's about just having an impact on kids that, or the community. It can be your high school, it can be your neighborhood, it can be the country, it doesn't matter. But looking at the other three categories, volunteer work oftentimes is community impact, right? But the reason I brought up community impact as something separate is that you can do volunteer work and not have that much community impact. So you could do beach cleanups, right, on a regular basis. That's wonderful. That's great volunteer work. It's important, but it's not necessarily changing the community. It's not changing the world around you on that level. Leadership, by the way, does not have to mean a position. So a lot of people see leadership and think it has to mean president, vice president, captain, right? Things like that. The titles are great. The titles aren't the most important thing. What matters is that you're taking initiative. If you have something that matters to you, that you're passionate about or driven to fix, that you say, this needs to be fixed, and here's how we're going to do it, right? So leadership can be more subtle. It can be also, creating a club or saying outside of school, I want to help with this, and finding some friends who are going to join you and doing something like that. Now, notable accomplishments, again, it's 10%, but again, if the notable accomplishment is going to the Olympics or winning a national writing award, it's more than 10%. So this is more for the average student going, oh, that's nice. You're the Spanish student of the month, right? Like that's great. This is more, I always point this out because I think a lot of people overlook the benefit, especially junior year, of starting to enter competitions and contests. So if you are a great writer, you're great at coding, you're great at anything, arts, submit your work, right? Do things. It shows colleges also that you're not afraid of rejection or failure, because they want kids who are comfortable being told no or being told they're not good enough. That means you're more resilient. That means that you're going to go learn and take, whatever feedback you're given by professors. So they like to see kids who even enter it. Obviously, if you lose everything, you don't have to put it on there if you don't want to. But at the same time, even just entering it, the other thing I point out is that you don't know how many people are applying for these things. One of my favorite all-time stories is I had a student who local Rotary Club was redecorating their office, and they had a photography competition so they could frame artwork. So it was for local high schoolers. My student won first, second, and third place and was applying as a photography major, so looked incredible. He was the only person who entered, so no one needed to know that. He just got to write first, second, third place in this competition in LA, right? So these things, don't overlook that, because there is a section on the application that asks about anything you've won, right? And they're not talking about sports, it's academic honors and awards is the section. But again, notable accomplishments can be in sports. You could be state champ in something, right? So this is just to give you a sense of like, these are the main buckets they're looking at. One thing that I hear from a lot of families, especially when kids are more introverted, is like, why does this matter? Why, if my student's smart enough and bright enough and motivated enough, why is that not good enough for schools? And the reality is that for a lot of schools, it is, right? A lot of schools aren't going to pass up somebody who's a genius and, going to be the one to cure cancer. That's great. But there's other schools that say, we don't want a kid who's just going to go sit in the library. We want a kid who's going to be engaged in our campus and make everything more interesting and better and, more fun. All of these things, but also have an impact on their community. So they look at it as if you were in high school and did not have an impact on your community, they assume you're not going to have an impact on their campus. So why would they take you over a kid who might, right? That's the like super blunt direction of that. But again, a lot of schools don't care. They'd be thrilled with somebody who has good GPA and good test scores. It just depends on where you're applying, but this will always help you. The only place it doesn't, as a side note, is the Cal States, who don't care. They don't really ask about this, so that's fine. But other schools, UCs care a lot about it. Almost all privates, most state schools. The bigger they are, the more they just want to know you're going to get involved. The smaller they are, the more they care about community impact, right? So even being editor in your yearbook or newspaper, that's leadership and that's community impact, right? And potentially notable accomplishments if you win awards. So they're looking at knowing that you've made a difference and that you're leaving a hole behind at Pally when you leave. That's the idea here. I want to show you what it looks like on the common application. I left the UC part off because it gives you a little more space, but it's also just laid out a little bit differently. The extracurricular activities and work experience, if you notice here how short of your descriptions, this is how much room you have on the application. You have 150 characters. That is it. So when you are trying to do less than a tweet and tell them what you did for 4 years and you're the top lacrosse player on the team, or you've been working for Red Cross and have done amazing things, you don't have much room. So, when I was picking on French Club and saying you just show up and eat baguettes, your activity description is going to look really sad. It's not going to have much to it. But if you can say, I coordinated this, organized this, founded this, initiated this, think of a resume, active verbs. So this is also a red flag as you're going through junior year. I want you to think about what impact are you having? And again, you don't have to go be president. You could say, I'll coordinate a bake sale, right? I'll do this, but something that shows you've taken that initiative, you're taking action and actually having an impact in that club. That's what matters in these descriptions. Now you see positions held, honors won, letters earned, your employer. Obviously, if your varsity in a sport, or you have won, again, if you had a poetry club you were part of and they won something, great. Now for employers, jobs. Let's talk about this just in general. There's two different types of jobs, in my opinion, like from a college perspective, right? You have one that is going to be, maybe it's related to your, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word, career. So if you're playing, it's about your career, or it's, your parents work somewhere and they got you a job, or you got a great internship at Boeing if you want to be an engineer. That's one type. The other type is working at a gas station. It's working, scooping ice cream, bagging groceries. People have a tendency to think the first one's better. Not necessarily. Again, it depends on what you're doing and where you're applying. If it's somewhere that people know have a competitive program, Boeing and SpaceX are perfect examples. If you get an internship there over the summer, even if there's sometimes paid or unpaid, if you got a paid one, great. That's competitive. That is hard to get in. Colleges know about those. But if you're working for your uncle's law firm, making $25 an hour, pouring coffee and maybe filing here and there, that's not impressive, even if you want to be a lawyer, right? You're not really showing much because you didn't earn anything. But again, if you work at the gas station down the street, or you didn't, you retail jobs in general, or waitressing, you can be a hostess at 16, right? There's a lot of things you can do at 16 from a college's perspective that shows work ethic. It shows humility, right? You're going to have friends and just kind of jerks come in and make your life miserable when they're having a bad day and you made the coffee wrong. But it shows colleges a different side of you than working as an intern at a law firm would. So not to say one's better than the other. Again, it depends on everybody's individual situations, but it's something to keep in mind, because a lot of kids are like, I don't know how to get involved at my school, or I don't know what else to do. This is something we always just say, like, get a job if you have the bandwidth for it. It can help. And you can sometimes have great essays talking about who you met and what characters and what experiences you had working at a gas station, right? It can be something interesting. Now, looking at the extracurricular activities thing, right here, you have 4 examples. You actually get 10 spots on the Common App. So if you have 30 activities, you're going to put 10. You could, in theory, upload something else, but generally, it's kind of like, you know, those of you who look at resumes in the workforce, it's like if somebody gives you a 10-page resume and they're 24 years old, it looks ridiculous. College is the same thing. They're like, pick the important things, right? Don't give us something you did this one thing one time, 1 year. So doing things more repeatedly. So if you notice here on the left-hand side, it's a grade level. So 9, 10, 11, 12. How many years did you do it? How many hours per week? How many weeks per year? So you want something that shows consistency, right? It can be seasonal. It can be once or twice a year, but do it every year. And if you haven't, start and show like, okay, I used to go to that animal shelter or do Toys for Tots every Christmas, but I only do it Christmas. It's like, well, there's other programs you can get involved in that would do something, you know, and do it for more for birthdays or do it for children in hospitals. Show that there's a trend. For your community service, you also want there to be a theme. So when we were looking back at, there we go, back at this, I want you to think about, does it look sincere, right? Because a lot of students just go do a few hours in an animal shelter, a few hours at the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure, a few hours here. But if you think of how that looks here, that's like, oh, so 1 year I did it for 4 hours, one time, never did it again. It doesn't look like it matters to you, right? It doesn't show that there's any kind of sincerity. So what you would like to do is come up with something that matters to you, right? So if you say, I like veterans and puppies, right? Those are the 2 things that matter to you. There's organizations, like there's one called Pets for Vets, right? And they take shelter dogs, they train them, and they end up making them support animals for veterans with PTSD, right? If you got involved in an organization like that, not only will you probably enjoy it more and find it more interesting, but it also is a sincere interest and it shows. And then you can say, I've done it for all these years, I've done more hours per week, more weeks per year. And that sincerity goes a long way with colleges. They're not born yesterday. They know a lot of kids pad their resumes for college. So, you know, all of this in the context of COVID, by the way, I always say this is a year that if you have had a student who's more introverted or lazy is aggressive, but not very interested in getting involved, this is a great time because there's an excuse for not getting involved for the last 18 months. But if you have, amazing, but now's the time to pick it back up, right? The excuse is gone. Now you can say, I'm more confident in my own skin. I'm more comfortable. What can I do at Pally? What can I do in my, neighborhood, surrounding areas? Think of things that you can do to have an impact. And they may not, hold it against you as much for not having done anything during COVID when you were locked at home. But here you're going to be in a situation where they're going to say, but now what? Now what are you doing that you have the option to do so? All right. Okay, so letters of recommendation. So this is something I always like to throw out because, which application you're using and whether it's an academic letter of recommendation or a counselor letter of recommendation or an outside letter of recommendation from a coach or a friend, everybody has, you can see different things, but this is from Common App. This is what they are looking at for their academic letters of rec. And the reason I put this on here is for people to understand what these letters are actually for. Because what I see a lot of are people saying, well, my student wants to be a biology major, we have to get her a biology teacher. But the reality is she never spoke in class, she got a good grade, but she's not involved, she didn't join biology club or whatever it is. So when you have something like that, look at this, you've got everything from integrity, reaction to setbacks, concern for others, all of these things that are not about how you basically are doing in the class. So yes, if you're doing engineering, you want to show a math or a science letter of rec for sure. But if your English teacher knows you better than anyone and has coached you on a team or does model you in with you, or you babysit for their kids, whatever it is, they're going to write better letters of rec. You want people who are going to put check boxes on the far right of this, right? One of the top few I've encountered, outstanding, excellent. If they're just going to say average, then it's not the right letter. So think about who truly knows you and can speak to your character. One of the things that always stuck with me is I've had an admissions rep a long time ago tell me that they look at letters of recommendation and personal statements to decide if they would want this kid to date or room with their own son or daughter. And that's how they phrased it. By the way, these guys did not have sons or daughters, so they're
What happened to it? Where's the sound?
Oh, we got some feedback here. Ready on mute? Okay. So anyways, but so if you think of it from the ability to show you should date or room with somebody's son or daughter, They don't care. They know if you're smart. They looked at your transcript. They looked at your test scores. Letters of recommendation and essays are going to be what shows them who you are, what's your character like, your integrity, your compassion. So make sure you're rounding yourself out, because again, colleges want kids who are going to benefit their student body, or are going to benefit the campus and their community. So when you're choosing people, remember, junior year, you always want at least one letter from junior year, sometimes two. So if that's the case, and you are going to have, I don't know how many teachers that you don't know, at least you guys, by the way, are lucky, because people who are going into senior year barely get to know their junior year teachers, but assume you're going to have at least one, you may have two. All right. So going through junior year, I want you thinking in every class, am I differentiating myself from my classmates? Am I putting effort in? Am I raising my hand in class? Am I speaking to the teacher after class? This is your chance to really give people, give the teachers an opportunity to write a great letter, right? So make it easy on them. Go in, be sincerely interested in the subject. Don't just show up to class, get an A and leave. So I want you thinking about this as you're going through the year, and just making sure that, I hate to, it's not BSE, but schmoozing a little bit, go in and again and show a sincere interest. If you love the class and that's what you think you want to study in college, or who you want to write your letter, you should be interested enough. Okay, so that's just an insight into letters of rec. So Common App essay prompts. So the UC prompts, by the way, are not terribly different. So, I mean, they are. So the difference, by the way, Common App essay, the personal statement, which is this, you pick one, and you notice the seventh option is the topic of your choice. So really all of these are just prompts to get the juices flowing. The UCs are different because the UCs give you 8 prompts, you pick 4, and they're shorter. These are 650, the UCs are 350. So what you're trying to do in each one is different, because the UCs don't get any other supplemental essays. It's just those 4, which means you are trying to round out how you look on the page, right? You're trying to pick topics that I'm going to talk about: my leadership, my community service, my passion for stem cell research, right? Whatever it is, you're picking very different things to make yourself feel very three-dimensional and human. Common App, with your personal statement, you want to pick a topic that you can really speak to, that again, thinking of it as somebody, they want you to date a room with their son or daughter. Are you going to be a good influence? Do you have passions and interests and commitment and integrity, right? It doesn't have to be academic. You're not bragging. It usually shouldn't be, by the way. This should be about something that impacted you, or who you are, what defines you, what makes you a good human being and an engaging human being. It can be talking about your intellectual vitality. It can be talking about how you help those who can't help themselves, anything like that. But this is somewhere between therapy on a page and an interview on the page. The personal statement goes deep, right? It's not surface level stuff, which the UCs are a little bit more so. Now, keep in mind, and I'm bracing all of you juniors because the number of panic seniors we see on this, there are supplements for every college. So if you apply to, and by the way, how many essays they require is not based on how competitive it is. If you look at Harvard compared to Columbia, Harvard has 1 essay, Columbia has 7. Stanford, they dropped it this year. They used to have 11, and I think now they're down to 5 or 6. But they're short, but they're hard. But then you're starting to try to figure out how these things fit together, right? If they want to know, tell us about an extracurricular activity that had an impact on you, they want to know all these other things, you want to start thinking about this stuff now. So I bring this up because anything that has an impact on you, a conversation you have, a moment, write it down. You will be so grateful next summer and next fall when you're writing these essays that you have a bank to pull from. And parents, you can help them brainstorm this. Your kids sometimes better than they know themselves. You might remember something from their childhood and be like, you've always been this way. This is how people see you and define you. And how can we come up with an example? So the best thing, you can come at this from 2 angles from brainstorming. I won't go too in depth with this because you have a year, but just as you're building your bank, I want you to think of it as you're either coming up with the takeaway you want colleges to have, which is you're compassionate, you'll fight for those who can't fight for themselves. If that's your thing, great. Now think of an anecdote from your life that demonstrates that. Show, don't tell, right? Lead with that. Come in and go, and ever since then, or this is an example of how I treat people, write it better than that. But that's one idea. The other is the opposite, is to say this moment had a great impact on me. What do I do with that? And then think of what lessons really came from that and go deep, right? You don't want something to be about how I realized how lucky I was when I did community service, right? You should in theory know that if you're a mature, even teenager. Colleges don't want to see that. So you want to be in a scenario that you can really kind of tell them who you are and tell them what matters about you. But this is where you control the narrative. right? You get to control what they see, how they're interpreting your actions, what matters to you, beyond the essays, or sorry, not beyond the essays, beyond the application and beyond your grades and test scores. These things, it's a few pages that the application that they see and that defines your life. This is how you round yourself out. So just keep this in mind as you're doing it. Now, when we talk about miscellaneous factors and how this factors in with your essays and with your grades and all the things we've already discussed, these are things to keep in mind. Again, some they don't apply to, so everything here at grain of salt. So demonstrated interest is a perfect example. Some schools very much care. Demonstrated interest is, have you proven to them that you really want to go there? Have you really explored them? If, again, COVID was different, but now if you're capable and being safe and healthy to go visit a campus and you can afford to, are you? Right? If not, and you're either it's not safe or you can't afford it, that's fine. But are you doing online info sessions and tours? Are you reaching out to get connected with a student in the program you're interested in? Demonstrated interest is showing them that you didn't just decide to apply randomly. It's more the reality that you've been excited about this school. So one big piece of advice I would give everybody tonight, any school you're interested in or think you might be interested in, go sign up for their emails. Get on their mailing list so that they can see that you signed up. One thing to keep in mind is this has to be the same email address you use for your Common App. So I always say, think about your email address. The number of times I've seen email addresses that are like gangsterforlife@gmail.com or go Trojans, right? Those are not, don't do that at gmail.com. So first name dot last name, something professional, but have something like that. And then sign up for all these emails so then they can connect you and go, oh, that's the person when you apply, that's the person who signed up for our emails back at the beginning of junior year, right? Side note, they do track whether you open those emails and whether you click on links. Not all schools do, but as of 2 years ago, 68% did. So my guess is this by now it's in the 80s. It's getting more common, it's more big brothery, but that's how it works. So just know that it's not just about signing up. And I have the students I work with, I always have them, I said, look, once a week, set aside a day that you're going to go open out you go through your inbox, any colleges that you're interested in, open the emails, click on the links and file things away that are relevant. So if you're applying to a school that has a new engineering lab and you're going to want to be an engineer, file that away. Because when you write why this university, you can go back to this building they're very proud of, right? Or they hired this incredible new professor and that's something you want to study, mention that, right? So just start filing this away. It makes your life much easier when you're a senior. And again, demonstrated interest can be everything from, again, those online info sessions, but if you can visit, it is great. And not just to demonstrate interest, but for you, because what you think you want, and I have kids who say they want New York City, but first of all, if you haven't been to New York City, just make sure you go before you make that call. But also NYU and Columbia are night and day different, right? They could not be more different fields. Boston's another example. Like if you compare Northeastern and BU to Boston College or Harvard or Tufts, very different vibes. So students who think they want urban or suburban or rural or big or small, sometimes seeing things makes a big difference. And same with, especially liberal arts colleges. A lot of kids who say they don't want a small school, but then when they go visit one, they're like, oh my gosh, the sense of community is amazing. And I get to deal with my professors on a day-to-day basis, right? So you get all of these wonderful things. So now, athletic recruitment. So we'll talk about athletic recruitment here. If this is a factor, wait and see if we can get that muted. Let's see. Got it. I think got it. Thank you. Okay. So athletic recruitment. If you are an athlete who are considering athletic recruitment, it depends on, if you're doing men's or women's, it depends on which sport. It depends on D1, D2, D3, D1A is even different from D1. This all factors in, but clearly if you have a coach that's vying for you and has your back through admissions, you have a better shot, right? So this is something, we actually have athletic recruitment counselors on staff who specialize in different sports. If that's something you ever want to chat about, it's good to know, when do you start? When do you get aggressive? When do they reach out to you? When can they? Because there's all these rules and regulations. So, but make sure you don't miss the boat. If that's not something you should be dealing with senior year, except for maybe a couple sports, most things you want to be around this time, if not already, starting to reach out. Again, COVID's delayed everything. So the reality is you're not going to be in a huge problem if, for most sports, because there were no games or tournaments or anything this past year. Portfolios and auditions. Clearly, this only affects people who are remotely RC, which is not me. But if you are a dancer, a singer, you're playing a film school, you're applying as an artist, anything like that, if they're weighing the value, like the ability that you show in your portfolio, how much they care about grades is different, right? So if you think about like USC Film School, right? If you're thinking of going there, yes, you have to have good grades to get in. But if you have the most incredible, screenplays or reels you put together from student films you've done or written or directed or produced, that makes a bigger difference. So same, if you're applying as a dance major and you're unbelievable, then that's going to weigh a lot. But if you're just like, oh, I'm on the dance team and I have fun with dance, then it doesn't really factor in. It's more of an extracurricular, right? So this is stuff that when it is related to your major or your program of interest, that's what you want. So just don't forget to look into those. They have different deadlines sometimes. They can be very complicated. It's not usually send us what you want. It's send us exactly this, right? These are the things we want. So high school relationship and reputation, Pally's fabulous. The relationship, I always say, it depends. And if you had a kid, hopefully this didn't happen, but if you had a kid last year who was at Pally who broke an ED agreement, that college may be a little bit cranky that there was an ED agreement broken. As a side note, there's a private school in LA that is going on over 20 years without anybody getting into Duke. But Stanford, they have no problem, but Duke hates them. It's just somebody must have ticked somebody off 20 years ago. But there are certain things that are out of your control. So the reason I say this is that some kids come, their heart's set on a school, a college, that it may be more of an uphill battle. Some, it's going to be much easier, right? Every school that you go to has different relationships, but Pally overall is great. Just keep this in mind that sometimes you'll see one going, oh, no one's ever even applied from Pally, right? There's this tiny school in the middle of nowhere that might benefit you because it's an unknown, or it may hurt you because they're not as used to seeing Pally because they don't know how to interpret it. But that it doesn't factor as much. Pally's big enough and established enough and has a great track record. You're not going to run into this as much. It's generally more the private schools in particular that have this really weigh into things. Interviews and social media. If they offer an interview, I don't care if they say optional, it is not optional. I've had plenty of people in admissions when I talk to them about why they rejected an amazing applicant who did early decision, did the legally binding option, decision interview. And I was like, it says optional. And they're like, it's kind of a test, right? Like, how much do you care? If you are personable, you want them to interview. If you're not personable, work on interview skills. But you want to show them that you care and you're excited and that you want to learn more about the school and tell them about yourself and sell yourself in the best way. So anyway, so social media. So social media, this is something just to be aware of. Colleges are really good at looking up kids' social media. So if you have, Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, you're a little bit safer on. Most of us little people don't know how to use any of those. A lot of kids have the option. They want to use social media and like shut it down so that it's just for friends. My point is this should be something that, sorry, something very strange going on my screen. I apologize. I don't know if anybody else can see this. But anyways, social media should be something you can use to your advantage. Think of it as an online resume. So show them you with your little hard hat, smiling at Habitat for Humanity with your friends, or a nice dinner with your family, right? Things like that. This is an opportunity. If they make it easy for them to find you and make it impressive what they find. So don't feel like just going private on social media is always the answer. Okay. Okay. So I think that's the crux of all of it. That's the basic stuff. I think the number one thing that I would say to take away from this is that whatever happened or didn't happen during COVID, now it's time to kind of pick up interest, get involved in Pally, get involved in your community, make sure grades, everything else are solid. And then if you have any questions, you got this on the screen, we've got our email address, our phone number, all that, but also at the bottom, that's where we do the one-on-one consult. So you can pick a day and time. Like I said, I'll chat with you about your kids and what they should or shouldn't be doing, or, should you be considering something or looking into things. We also have resources we're always happy to send for financial aid and scholarships. So whatever we can do to help, we're always delighted to help. But I think that's it on my end. Karen, are you there by chance?
Yeah, so I've been answering questions the whole time.
Oh, you're amazing. Thank you.
I don't see any there. Someone just asked a question, a couple of things. I wanted to say first, on Naviance, when you get it activated next year, and it will be, when we come back from Christmas break, you can also see virtual college visits that are happening there. So colleges across the country sign up to visit the school by Zoom. Not too many are doing them in person now, but you can also see college visits on there. Another question came up, it is about students who have no idea of what they want to major in. Now, my answer to that is for them to take the most rigorous course load they can handle.
Yeah.
Well, I put the well after that. That's what you want to do. You don't have to know. Colleges take undeclared majors as readily as they will take a major that someone is already claiming to want to do. Lots of times that changes. So I wouldn't worry about that. I would just make sure they're in rigorous courses and they exceed the minimums that are required by the A through G. So 3 or 4 years of all their academic core subjects.
Yeah, and one thing just to add to that, I would say that, especially at the most competitive schools, they want to see kids who are trying to find out what they enjoy. Right. So if you're just sitting back going, I don't know, and because I have a lot of kids like that, and by the way, I believe that's what college is for, right? That's where you should go try things and explore. But if you think you might like something in STEM and you have a robotics team, join the robotics team. It doesn't have to be even academic classes, but I think just trying things, showing them that you're open to things sends a message. It's less about even what you're doing and more about the fact that you're getting out of your comfort zone.
Okay. And then someone asked about the practice SAT and ACTs. Those are happening now. You can start doing those now. If you go on our website and look under PTSA, you can find that they have SAT and ACT like every other weekend that's evaluated by Compass, and they get a really, really good breakdown of their strengths and their weaknesses from Compass. And I think the fee is very nominal. So go on our Pally website and you can find out about that. Further detail about SAT, ACT submissions for UC schools. They will not look at ACT or SAT scores for admissions. However, they may look at them for placement in certain English and math courses. They have been doing that, but for admissions, no, you can have a perfect score and it will not be used for anyone, just so you know that. Yes, we will be providing the recording link. I'm trying to see if there was another one, Jen, I think.
I see. So were you doing direct responses? Just so
I did some to everyone and some direct.
So a couple, and I'll just chime in on, I see a couple things here that look like direct messages to me. So I won't go through, some of them are a little bit more, I think, personal and individualized, but some of the bigger ones. So different ones asking what's different in admissions because of COVID, which is a great question. Mm-hmm. The reality is test optional is a big one. So this is the one thing I would tell all of you. So don't get too comfortable. If you're seniors, then we know pretty much everywhere's test optional this year. A year from now, I know admissions reps and deans of admissions at certain colleges who want to go back to requiring testing, but there's the political landscape and kind of the social aspects of it. There's also, how did their classes turn out? Do they feel like they did well these couple years of having test optional? It may stay test optional everywhere. You also may have some schools that go test blind like the UCs, and you also may have schools that go back to wanting to require testing. I know some of the more competitive schools I've talked to, they've been very frustrated saying during COVID, like people don't have activities. We don't really know how to weigh their, grades because some schools had very intensive homework and great teachers involved, and others had teachers just doing recordings and it was 2 hours a day, right? So that's the biggest difference right now with COVID is that I think they have less data. So the more, to quote Jerry Maguire, help me help you is the main thing. So it's like, you want to help college admissions help your kid by giving them this information. If you can say, here's good test scores, here are academic, success stories that I had, extracurriculars I'm involved in, give them more, you're going to be more likely to get in than the kid who wasn't able or didn't want to do any of that stuff. So go above and beyond. I also see just I'm going to go through a couple of direct messages. Is that okay, Karen?
Yeah.
Look at that. So just saying, are colleges doing in-person tours or virtual? Completely depends. It's a great question, and it's going to keep changing. So there were some that were doing it over the summer and shut it down once kids got on campus because of COVID, and others are going, no, it's fine. It also depends where in the country it is and what their general rules are and expectations culturally and socially there. You're going to have one thing I always do want to point out, make sure you go when kids are on campus, if at all possible, right? Obviously going in the summer is better than nothing, but it helps when you're actually able to go and see what the kids are like and sit in on a class, right? And maybe even have a student who will let you spend the night in their dorm. Sometimes the admissions offices will happily coordinate that. Other times, finding somebody who goes there. But the experience there is more than an architecture tour. So visiting when no one is there doesn't help as much. But pay attention to where you would eat, where kids go off campus, how often they go off campus, what is social life like. You can tell more schools in session. So if you can do in person and it's available, do it. Virtual is better than nothing, but it's nowhere near the same experience. Let's see. So point is like, yes, if the students already have their class schedules and APs are important, look, changing schedules now obviously is going to be a nightmare for everybody. And I think Callie would kill me if I was like, yeah, go try to change all your schedules. It's not about that. It's about just doing well at this point. And then senior year, if you feel like you can take more than where you're at, then just go over, do as much as you can senior year. But I guess my point was that you can also go take stuff at SMC or at UCLA or online. So there's other options. If you feel like you could have challenged yourself more and didn't, that's an option, is you can do things more in the supplementary thing to show them that, look, I had extra time because things were easy for me. And so I went and did this at SMC or wherever it was, right? Okay, I think I got a couple more down at the bottom here. Sorry, there's
Test blind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Will UCs remain test blind for our class of 2023? The SAT and ACT are not coming back to the UCs. What other tests they may implement is yet to be discovered, because I think there will be something. They haven't announced what the something is, but they won't be going backwards. They've been, grunting about the SAT, ACT for many years. So, COVID was just like the nail, what did they say? The nail that hit the head that hit the nail, whatever. The straw of the camel's back, whatever those things are. I don't know those, but they're not going back to that. Jen, you can give your take on that too.
No, I agree. I do think, I will say I'm a little frustrated with that angle with the UCs, but you're 100% right. I don't think they can backtrack on that now, but there is talk that in 5 years they'll have their own test, which to me, it's like they're trying to simplify this for students, but they're creating a third test now. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but we don't know. In the timeline, they could decide not to. They could do it sooner. They can ramp things up, but yeah, UCs are doing their own thing. So, okay, a couple of questions here. What do students or colleges think about students who have no social media accounts? Look, it's not necessarily going to hurt them, but it's also then a lot of times the schools are going to wonder if they're just hidden and private. So it's not something I wouldn't be too worried about it if your kid truly has no social media. But if you have time, you've got a year to start building something. Like I said, I encourage my students to post all the things that make you look like a happy, well-rounded kid you'd want as a part of a community. You've got a year to do it if you're comfortable with it. And if you're not, that's fine. But just know that, colleges generally, if they can't find you, it's rare that there's a kid not on social media. Obviously, those unicorns do exist, but a lot of times they just assume you're on private and not showing what you're doing. Okay, when do they take actual SAT and ACT tests, and 2 or 3 sittings for practice or for real? For real. So this is something that if you are taking, again, we talked about the curve. So if you take it once, a perfect example, so ACT. So there can be up to a 4-point swing on the same number of questions on the science section. So you could get a 34 one day and a 30 another day. So if you got a 30 first, you wouldn't necessarily go, oh, it's fine. I guess that's the best I could do. You could take it again, get the same number right. But also don't forget that for the science and reading section in particular, it's very subjective, right? So if you get one reading passage that throws you off, that could kill your score. But if you take it again and don't get a reading passage that throws you off, you could have a near perfect score. So we generally recommend doing that. And again, when they take it depends on where they are in math, how much prep they need, if they're completely ready. Whether you have to submit scores or not, it's getting challenging, because if it's test optional, in theory, you don't have to, but keep in mind, College Board does submit everything for schools that ask for it. So if certain school tells College Board, we want to see everything a student's taken, you pay your $13 or whatever it is, and they send everything. So what I generally tell people is like, don't take a real test for practice. You can take practice tests, make sure you're where you need to be. You may not need to prep, right? You may be totally fine. That's great. But if that's the case, if you need prep, great. If you don't need prep, then go take the real thing, but make sure you're scoring where you want to score before you go in, just to be safe. Okay, so contacting coaches, I've seen some questions. Hi, Joelle. So I see that. And if you have, somebody who plays basketball, plays soccer, plays anything like that, It depends on D1, D3 or D2. I keep skipping over D2. But knowing if it's not necessarily the coach reaching out, unless you have a great relationship, it's making sure you've already established that. Usually you can do official visits, you can have more casual conversations up front, but that's something it would absolutely depend on what division and, even what conference. Some of them are different in how they do things. And some, by the way, just want to wait until beginning of senior year and say, send us, if they're high academic, sometimes they're like, just send us, your test scores and GPA and we'll talk. Others, a lot of the IVs can be more aggressive, especially for certain sports, and that can start much sooner. So I'll have to get more information on that, but hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, so somebody asked what test blind means. That's where they won't look at it. They refuse to. So test optional is you send it if you want. If you send it, they'll consider it. Test blind, like Karen was saying, with the UCs, you could have a perfect score. They refuse to look at it or consider it. So that's test blind. When do college applications happen? This is something. Oh, go ahead.
Start working on them now. Start.
This is the fun of this time of year. Yeah. So August 1st, they open, but you can start on essays. I usually tell my students start in June, July, if you can before senior year, but August 1st, they open. Your deadlines are going to generally be between October 15th and February 1st, depending on where you're applying. So that's something. There is a timeline on our website. So if you go to the website on the screen, gecollegeprep.com, under resources, there's high school timelines. So you can go check that out and look at for junior year, kind of when things are senior year. But that's something absolutely that you got time, but it comes fast. So I
have one about the AP classes that I want to take. They said if colleges stop looking at grades after junior year, why should we take AP classes in the senior year? Well, for the UCs, they don't stop looking at what you're taking. They just don't use your senior year grades in their admissions evaluation of you. Now, for private schools, out-of-state public schools, more selective schools, they're going to look at that first semester of senior year, and they're going to see what courses you have planned for the entire year. Even the UCs, even if they're not using the grades, they're going to see if you're keeping up a rigorous course load. They will look at that and take that into consideration. So to stop that senioritis, you've gotten all A's from 9th to 11th grade, doesn't mean you can take all regular courses now in 12th grade if that is not what you've previously been doing. So that they are looking at that.
Absolutely. It's the course rigor, because you're trying to also prove to them not only that you're capable of doing well in challenging classes, but that you enjoy them, that you want to take them, you love to learn. They want scholars, right? So when you're trying to figure out what to take senior year, yes, you need to keep your grades up, but the reality is the rigor almost matters more than the grades, because a lot of schools will have made a decision about you. I mean, within reason, right? But if you're afraid you're a straight A student that might get 1 B+, I'd rather see more competitive classes and strong, higher rigor than taking regular classes and skating. This also comes down to dropping subjects, core subjects. So I have students where, if you want to be a humanities person and you're a very English, history, philosophy, whatever, and you want to drop science senior year, that's fine. But if you're dropping science and foreign language or something like that, it's not as good. And it kind of and again, it depends where you're applying, but it's keeping in mind that if you just show them, I don't have to take anymore, so I don't want to. It's not the best message, especially for the more competitive schools. They want to see kids who love to learn. And yes, you don't have to keep taking everything, but if you're dropping more than one core subject, it's not great. I also see a question, which is a great question, about how many APs you should take. This is my rule of thumb. Everyone's different. Everyone's applying to different, competition levels of schools, competitive. But think of it as always doing more the next year. That's in an ideal world. And now, obviously, if you bite off more than you can chew and you have to step back or take the same number, so you take one sophomore year and it didn't go well, then of course you don't want to go take 2 the next year if it's going to really mess with you. But what I see a lot is people who do well sophomore, junior year, and then senior year, they're like, I can step back, because the senior year, they're not going to see these grades. And that sends a bad message to colleges. So if you take 1 and then take 2 junior year, try taking 3 senior year. And again, your limits of what you can do, but always try to ramp up, not down whenever possible. Boarding school for 13th grade if you have athletes. So it's PG. Post-grad year is on the applications. If you noticed with activities, it was 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and PG was that. It's basically a 13th grade. And it is something where some athletes who aren't quite where they need to be, go do a 13th grade at a boarding school, especially on the East Coast, there's a lot of them. and you go get better at your sports. I've had kids also do it if they didn't get into their top choice schools and they didn't want to go to a safety or a target. They want to get better. So they go take more competitive academic stuff at a boarding school. I think it's a little much, but at the same time, for some people, it's the right choice, right? And I think it depends on what you need. And also if one more year of playing football, and some sports, it's about growing, right? It's about filling out. It's about getting taller. It's about getting faster. And a year can make a big difference in recruitment. Then it's a different conversation, but that may not be the most important thing. Let's see, anything else that you can think of? Karen, I think most of this stuff is a little more like direct and Oh, one thing, sorry, I see one thing that I meant to address, letters of rec. There was a question about whether it's from
11th.
Sorry?
The 10th or 11th grade one?
10th and 11th, but I also see one that I think looks like a direct message, but it's about, does it have to be teachers? So keep in mind that some schools will let you do only one teacher letter of rec, right? And they demand it be junior year. Some will let you send two, and they have to be from junior year. It could be one from junior and one from freshman year. Some are very general and don't have the requirements. Like I was saying earlier, you want to at least have one junior year teacher, ideally two. But for people who are not teachers or counselors, there are a lot of schools, especially private schools, that are delighted to have letters from your coach, from the family you babysit for, from your model UN supervisor, advisor, right? So there are some schools that really want those outside ones. Dartmouth has something called a peer recommendation. So your friend writes a letter of rec for you. So some schools really care about that. Others don't let you because they don't want the paperwork. They don't want an extra letter to read. They're like, we'll just take one from the school counselor, one from the teacher, and call it a day. So it depends on where you're applying on that.
And one thing to note with that, if they are anyone, for Pally parents, if there are anyone, if you have anyone writing a letter that is outside of the Pally network, you should include them as an other recommender on your Common App. Your teachers would be submitted only through Naviance. Do not put the teachers on the Common App. They're submitted through Naviance.
Excellent. Yeah, and this, and I see a couple of questions also about early decision and what it means. So this is a great question, and something that when you're visiting colleges, by the way, this is something to ask and understand because everyone does it a little differently, but here's the basic understandings, or the things you want to understand about this. So early decision, legally binding. You sign a contract that if they accept you, you get in, and then you go, right? So if they accept you, you're done. You don't get to see where else you got in. The only exception can be if there's a financial change in your family and all of a sudden you can't afford that school, that can be a potential out, but you don't want to count on that because I've had some students who've had nightmares who decided to break an ED agreement and did not go well. The school also then found what college they were trying to go to and called that school and told them how shady they were. So don't break an ED agreement if you can avoid it. So there's things like that. Now, early action, usually the deadlines are November 1st, sometimes the 15th. Early action is when you act early and they act early and they tell you basically, you got in by December or you're waitlisted or not waitlisted, you're deferred or you're rejected, but you at least know between December and January, but you have till May to get back to them. So early action is if your application is the best it's going to be going into senior year, if you already have amazing activities, your grades are strong, your rigor's there, they're not waiting to gather any more information, you have standardized test scores, early action is phenomenal. Not all schools offer either ED or EA, but they are great options. They can help. ED can make a huge difference. The biggest challenge, to be honest, is I think the financial side. So a lot of people, ED is limiting because you can't compare financial aid packages. You're committing to one, but if you can swing it, for instance, Northwestern, where I went, it's almost 4 times the acceptance rate ED compared to regular decision. It's crazy. Now, if you're Harvard, it's basically the same. They're like, we accept you, you're coming regardless. We don't need to know, you don't have to promise. But keep in mind, the reason it's so beneficial in a school like Northwestern or Vanderbilt or Duke or schools like that, is that we all have a tiny insecurity, thing about the Ivies. And people who go to Northwestern or apply to Northwestern may be hoping they get into Harvard or Stanford or wherever. And if you guarantee Northwestern you're going to go, they're going to be like, okay, it's confident. Because remember, side note, yield. So how many people they accept them back factors into their college rankings. So ED helps colleges. So that's why a lot of colleges are moving more towards it. 2 other types, and this is a lot of information for juniors, but just so you're looking at it, restrictive early action. Restrictive early action means that there's a restriction on that early action. You want to read the fine print. Different colleges have different things. Some say it's not binding for you. You don't have to come here if we accept you, but you cannot do binding anywhere else. So you could not ED elsewhere. Some schools also won't let you EA anywhere. You can't even do early action anywhere else, but you don't really get the benefit of an ED agreement. So restrictive early action is usually annoying. Stanford has it. Yale has it, a couple places where it's not a huge advantage to you, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. And then early decision 2. This is a new thing. It didn't exist a few years ago, and now it's hot and trendy. Basically, what you're doing is that Vanderbilt, University of Chicago, schools like that are now offering it. More and more will, I think, over time. But the idea is, let's say we'll pick the Chicago schools. You ED in November to Northwestern, you don't get in. Then they tell you that in December, and then January 1st, you tell University of Chicago, I'm doing ED2, which means you're now legally binding to them. There's a second round of potential EDs at some schools. So it's just strategically, that's a whole different conversation that's very individualized, but you want to be thinking of that. One thing to keep in mind when we're talking about deadlines, and I kind of threw out October 15th, is that October 15th is rare. It's like UNC Chapel Hill has it. But there are some scholarships. Actually, speaking of Chapel Hill, their Moorhead Kane scholarship is October 1st. So most colleges other than UNC Chapel Hill are not going to be in October, but some scholarships are, and some portfolios and audition things are in October. But the vast, vast majority of other schools are definitely in November. So you got a year to worry about that, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay, Karen, anything else?
Juniors, if you're a junior parent, you will be applying to college next August. If you're a senior parent, you are applying now. That question came up. So if you're a senior parent, you're applying right now. This is your time. This is your season. Junior parents, you have until next August before all this happens. One last thing, the difference between the Common App and Naviance. The Common App is what you use to apply to college. Naviance is what Pally uses to submit documents on your behalf that colleges need to go along with your application. Your teacher recs, your counselor rec, our school report, like our school evaluation, the counselor evaluation, all of that, your transcript, all of that is sent to the colleges through Naviance. We send that, you do the application, you send that, and then the colleges match all that stuff up together and make a nice little profile that they review for admissions for you. Yeah. And we can link together.
I have a quick question. If your school offers APs, but you take the honors class, how does that affect your application?
Karen, you want to take this or you want me to? You're welcome to.
Either way, you can go.
Okay, all right. So it depends where you're applying, and you'll probably get the same answer from both, but Karen may have, some schools are delighted to see honors, and they're like, that's great, you're challenging yourself, you're taking more than just the standard, that's all they're looking for, and they'll be thrilled. If you're looking at those top 20 schools, and I'm picking on them, there's also people that are, or schools that are above 20 that would want this too. Some want to see AP because it's the hardest, right? So honors is kind of medium, but you don't want to overdo it. If you think you would really struggle in an AP class and you could do on an honors class, great. But keep in mind, honors is technically a high school level class, just accelerated. An AP class is a college level class at a college speed. So it's different. Does that help? Maybe. Karen, go ahead.
And I want you to understand, we have kids that do both programs. We have kids that are clearly on that AP track. We have kids that are clearly on just the honors track. They're making straight A's and they're doing well, and they go to college also. They all go to college. Just remember, it's good to look at the college, look at the stats, look at the averages of those colleges and what their students typically look like. And then you can evaluate what your list of colleges should look like. That's what it means to create a balanced college list. If you've taken a clearly, strictly honors program, that's not who usually is going to Harvard. Or the clearly, strictly honors Should you write that off completely? Maybe you can apply. It'll be a super reach. I'm not saying not apply, but then you look at schools that will take a strong honors curriculum in high school. So I don't want anyone thinking, oh, I better change my schedule and go take 3 APs tomorrow, because that's, you're setting yourself up for doom. Really, if you haven't been taking APs, you do not want to start with them in senior year. You have to build each year, just like Jen was saying earlier, because they have a rigor to it that you've never experienced in even just an honors class. They are college level courses. You're required to do a lot on your own and test it on it without instruction sometimes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then one other question I see here that I think if you just about ED, it says if you don't get in your choice with ED, do you not get in at all, or can you apply regular admission? If they reject you, you're done. If they defer you, which is very common, they're basically like, we're not sold on you, but we're considering you. We want to see who else applies. Then they're going to put you into the regular decision pool and consider you from there. This is something there.
Can you do that last one, Jen? And we'll make that the last question.
Yeah, you bet.
I came in at 8:30 this morning. I do have to go.
Go home. Okay. So yes, we'll knock this one out. So okay. When you begin college apps, yeah, so college apps, you're going to start next summer. So if you're in 11th grade, it's the summer before senior year that you want to get started on your essays and applications. But like we were talking about earlier, starting to brainstorm for essays and thinking about how your extracurriculars are going to look on the page. Going, are you filling it? Do you have gaps? Do you not have any community service? Are you not involved in Pally at all? That's the stuff you want to think of now to how to fill those applications out. Then you said if one desires to go to a UC school, does standardized testing really matter? No, like, at least for SAT, ACT, APs and stuff are a little bit different because they can be used for placement. There's other things there. But if you're taking all these AP classes, I would tell you still try to do well. And look, the beauty of doing well on an AP when it's being used for placement is that you can either test out of some classes and not have to take the basic 101. You can have fewer classes because you got rid of a requirement, and so you can have a free period, or you can fill it with something fun and interesting. So don't overlook the benefit of just getting credits for the APs, even if it's not necessarily what's going to make you look great on the page as an applicant. But keep in mind, senior year is when most people take the majority of APs. You don't have the scores until after you've been accepted. So they're caring about rigor senior year, and then they only care about the scores, come when you get there, basically. Yeah.
All right. I'll go ahead and end it. Like I said, I'm Karen Ellis, the director of the college advising team here at Pally. Jen Kaifesh's information is right up there. If you have questions, you can always email collegecenter@pallyha.org. Thanks for the great turnout.
Good to see everybody. Thanks so much for your time.